You are listening to Influencers from the Conference Board.
Welcome, everybody, to Influencers. This is our series of podcasts tackling timely topics with exceptional experts, topics that are important to the marketers and the communicators of today. Today, we're going to discuss how artificial intelligence will make a real impact on marketing. I'm Ivan Pollard. I have been a marketer and a media guy. I'm now leading the Marketing and Communications Center at the Conference Board. And with me, I'm very honored to have one of our senior fellows, Mike Moran, a 30-year veteran of IBM, 3 best-selling books about the internet and marketing, 12 patents, now acting as the Chief Product Officer of Solo Segment. And Mike, you say famously on your website that internet marketing is more about marketing than it is about advertising. And when we hold that in our brains and think about artificial intelligence, we're going to have a very good discussion here. But Mike, let's start off with you telling the audience a little about yourself and why you think this topic of AI is so important to marketers and communications professionals.
So thanks, Ivan, for giving me this opportunity. You had a nice little summary of my career. So I did work for IBM for 30 years. I spent a lot of that time in IBM research, but other times in IBM product divisions. I retired from IBM in 2008 as a distinguished engineer, which is an executive level technical position. So I have a very strong technical background, but I also have a strong marketing background. I been a product manager for many years, and I ran big parts of IBM.com for 8 years. And all of those things kind of prepared me for my post IBM life, where I've been a consultant. And as you mentioned, I'm one of the founders of a software MarTech AI company called Solo Segment, where I'm the chief product officer. So a lot of the thought process that goes into AI is something that I've spent a lot of time with. I mean, I've been working in AI since the 80s. So after 30 years, I'm kind of an overnight success. And I think the thing that's changed the most is that people think of AI as being whatever they don't expect a computer can do. And so the things that we worked on in the 80s that were considered AI then are now considered boring now. So we were very proud of the fact that we could find words that were variants of words in 30 different national languages. So we knew mouse was mice. And so that was a proud moment in 1988. And now it's like nobody would think of that as being AI at all. And so I think AI is kind of a moving target. And so I think for marketers, it's less important to be thinking about, whether you have AI or not. What's really important is for you to find things that are effective, whether they're AI or not. So to me, it's if you look at the definition of AI in Wikipedia, and it has to be true because it's in Wikipedia, it says that AI is basically intelligence that you expect of a human being instead of a computer. And so it's when the computer can do what you think an intelligent human being can do. And if you think about it, the only thing they've defined in that definition is what artificial means, which I don't think is the hard part. Like the hard part is what does intelligence mean? And so I think that's what will bedevil us, right? Is that I think that it's very hard for us as a species to analyze what intelligence actually means. And so I think that you should spend a lot less time thinking about AI and what it means, and more time thinking about what it does, and more time thinking about what it can do for you. And so I think whether something is AI or whether it's just some other type of automation like predictive analytics or some other type of area, I wouldn't worry too much about whether something is called AI. I would worry more about whether it's going to help you or not.
So help you as a marketer and a communicator. And when you think about the range of things that a marketer is asked to do today and the stories that communicators tell us and have to tell, I guess the application, I think, is a fascinating thought you just made, which is it's not the artificial that's important, it's the intelligence. And that intelligence, if you had to put a very loose descriptor around what it does for people, Mike, what would that be?
I think what it does is it gives you opportunities where the machine can do things that either people can't do, or they can't do quickly enough, or they can't do at scale. And that's really what you care about. So for example, one of the things that is happening now is that there are many different instances of AI models that can create content. So you've seen GPT-3, there's other ones that have come out where they can automatically create content from you just giving it some information, and it can write like the way a human being can write. And so simplistically, you might say, well, that's wonderful, right? Because now we don't need as many writers, or maybe we can have the writers just checking the AI instead of having to do that. And immediately, though, what happens is that Google comes out and says, well, we can detect when something's been generated by GPT-3 or other AI models, and we're going to downgrade that content. And so marketing is always about not kind of the efficiency, but the effectiveness. I think efficiency is only important once you've already proven to be effective. And so we have to look at market forces in marketing. So things like what Google will do when everyone can generate as much content as they want for basically nothing. And that's what's happening now, right? And so there are going to be other forces in the market that will take away that efficiency. So instead of looking for efficiency, I would be looking for effectiveness. A lot of the work that I do is around what's called human in the loop AI, where what it does is it has an expert, a person who is tuning the AI. You could think of it as run a playbook. So it's not just that the AI is making decisions randomly, it's that the AI is making decisions according to what human beings have set out for it to do. So that, I think, is the place for us to focus. So if you're using the AI algorithms to generate content that you're then sending to a human being to kind of rewrite and spiffy up, you are probably fine. Google is not going to detect that that was generated by the algorithm, and then you're going to be okay. And you may have gotten your efficiency, but the truth is that the real reason to do it is effectiveness. The real reason to do it is that you're going to get your message out there to more people. You're going to get more messages out there, and they're going to be messages that actually work.
I think that's your marketing background coming up there, Mr. Moran. So this notion that effectiveness. I mean, I'm mean because I was a media buyer. I wanted effectiveness and efficiency. There was no trade-off for me. You drive one of them as high as you could, and the other one as low as you
Right.
could. So the cost as low as you could. But I think that's fascinating. This notion that there are market forces that a lot of the marketers they have in the background, but we need to put them a bit more in the foreground. And this notion that the machine can do things faster and at larger scales and with more variety than a human, but that they can't replace the human, or if they do, Google will spot it. So I love that. Just a quick step back to help my brain and maybe the brain of some of our other listeners. You talked about AI, but other things like predictive analytics, and you hear the term machine learning and, kind of unsegmented data and stuff. What's the difference between machine learning, predictive analytics, and AI? Where does the intelligence rack in?
So if you talk to tech heads propeller heads who care about these things, AI includes machine learning. So machine learning is a technique of AI. You may have also heard the term deep learning. That is a subset of machine learning. There are other techniques in AI, such as natural language processing or text generation. That's what we were just talking about when we were talking about GPT-3. So it can generate text, but you can also, natural language processing helps it understand text. So those are two other techniques that may or may not use machine learning when they're being executed. And so what machine learning is basically the kind of AI that is different from an automation of a regular software program. If you think about how a software program works, it's basically a set of instructions that the computer follows. So it's directions, it's a recipe. But that's not what machine learning is. Machine learning is an approach where you can give it a bunch of examples of what you want it to do, and it starts to generalize from the examples as to how to do it. So when it's finished, a person doesn't know how the machine actually did that. So instead of it being a recipe, it's as if you were given 20 different bowls of chili, and then you were asked to make chili from that. And so if you were given enough things that are chili and enough things that are not chili, you could probably figure out how to make chili. And that's really what machine learning is. That's why they call it learning, because the more examples you can give it, the more data it has, the better a job it's going to be of making the chili or whatever the task is that you've given to it. And so if you think about learning for people, if I gave you the same thing to do 100 times, by the 100th time, you'd be better at it. You'd be more accurate. You would be faster, right? You'd be better at it because you're learning. But if you take a regular software program and you give it the same stuff 100 times in a row, if it has a different answer on the 100th time, that's called a bug, right? Because it's not following the instructions, right? It didn't do exactly what it's supposed to do the same way every time. So the reason they call it learning is because it does get better. It gets faster. It gets smarter. It gets more accurate. And so to us, it looks like learning.
And then the intelligence, I like the fact that you say that's a subset of intelligence, because then what you do with that learning, especially when we think applying it to marketing and communications, what you do with it is where I guess intelligence comes in. I should acknowledge to the readers, I've tried to cook chili for years and years and years, never managed to do it, according to my son. And that old thing about you practice something 10,000 times, I've done the American accent 10,000 times and got no better at it. So the machines, the speed at which they can do it and the speed with which they learn actually does outperform. The 10,000 hours to become a violinist, it's like a machine these days, especially when you put quantum computing into play, it's going to take 10 minutes, not 10,000 hours. Let's think about applying it then to marketing. Let's take the simple definition, of the 4 Ps of marketing, just for simplicity. So, if we define marketing in these 4 buckets, and then I'll add a couple on, we'll look at where artificial intelligence is going to make an impact on marketing. So obviously the creation of products or services, the manipulation of pricing, the route to the marketplace, and then the promotion, of course, like you said, the largest number of the right people in the right way. Let's add just a couple more in. Proximity, which was always difficult when I started out in my career. How do you get close to the moments that matter? So you advertise to the people to whom it's going to make a difference, but don't waste money on those to whom it's not. So that proximity. And then increasingly, we also have purpose. That the only reason to mention that is you can't have a machine fragmenting your purpose and fragmenting what a business stands for, just trying to fit it to what Mr. X, Mrs. Y, or them over there are going to want. So when you start adding that, the 4 Ps, and then the 2 other Ps that come in, proximity and purpose, where is it in that mix of Ps, Mike, that you think AI makes the biggest difference?
It's probably going to have an impact on just about all of them. If you look at, product for sure. If you look at any product that's helping someone to do something, if it has any kind of digital data associated with it, you can figure out how AI is going to be able to help it. So things as prosaic as a sneaker, if you put a sensor in it where it can detect how the sneaker is being used, how fast you're running, how much impact you're having, where that impact is on your foot, all of a sudden you're throwing data off. And Nike has all sorts of information that it helps you maybe correct your gait when you're running. It can help you to plan your workouts. It can help you understand whether a cross trainer is a better shoe for you. And so a lot of that can use machine learning because they've gathered data from an awful lot of people. And so if they can figure out what the patterns are of the data that they've delivered by taking a subset of those people and having doctors examine their feet, having them see what their workout results have been, and basically correlating that data to real outcomes. Now, all of a sudden, you have a product that's using AI to tell lots of people how they're doing. Price is already happening. If you look at airline seats and other types of things, there are certain types of products where it's already being manipulated by AI, and so that one I'd say is almost a done deal, right? That one is fairly easy to figure those things out. Place, I think, is a little harder to figure out how AI is going to work. I think AI is more about what you do in the place than finding a new place. But there is a possibility for AI to become a new place. There's been a lot of talk, probably 30 years or more in the making, about things like intelligent agents that would go and do your shopping for you. And that would obviously be using AI. And so that could create a new type of place where you're not even present, but your agent is. So that, I think, is a possibility. Promotion, it's already happened. If you look at paid search ads, if you look at display ads, they're already using AI to figure out where they should go. The pricing, as we mentioned before. Proximity, I think, might be the most interesting one. If you think about what we consider today to be kind of the best experience, like if I were to say to you, hey, think of a website that you always find what you're looking for, you trust it to have the right information for you, you'd probably think of Amazon. And when you think of Amazon, there's basically two things Amazon's doing. One is it has a great search engine. So you mostly go to Google when you're searching for something, but if you're searching for a product, you probably go straight to Amazon, because Amazon has taught you that you actually skip a step by going to Amazon first. And so that is using all sorts of AI and machine learning and natural language processing and other things to try and figure out what the right answer is to your question. The other thing that it does is it does content recommendations. So it says people who bought this product also, or people looked at this product, eventually bought this other one. That's called a customer also viewed model in AI. And that's the kind of thing that can create that terrific experience for you. The company I work for, Solo Segment, we actually produce those experiences of site search and content recommendation for B2B companies, where it's not so easy for you to know when people found what they're looking for. With Amazon, it's simple. If they buy something, you know they found what they're looking for. So that's the signal you need to train the machine learning. In B2B, it's not so simple. You might have multiple people coming to the site. They have different questions. You can't tell the difference necessarily between when they got their question answered or when they didn't. And that's what we do for them, is to help them find that signal, find that North Star that allows machine learning to give them the search and content recommendation experiences that the big guys have, who are doing e-commerce. Purpose, I don't know if there's some way for purpose to really be AI driven. I actually share your trepidation in the question of, will AI get in the way of what your real purpose is? I think that's more of a possibility, that people would let the cart before the horse than maybe looking for efficiency instead of effectiveness. Purpose is always about effectiveness, right? Purpose is always about trustworthiness. It's about people, transparency. It's about people knowing where you're coming from. I don't see a world in which AI is a substitute for people. When we talk about AI, there's two kinds, right? There is what they call artificial general intelligence. So that's the kind of thing where a machine can think, in broad terms about anything a human being can think about. We're nowhere near that. I don't think we're going to be near that in my lifetime. But the place we are is in narrow AI. So if you give it a particular task, it might be able to do that task better than a person can do it, faster, more effectively, as we mentioned before. And that's really where this is. Purpose is such a broad thing that I think you really need the intelligence of people to get it done.
That's fascinating. I'll unpack some of the many brilliant things you said there. I love the example of the sneaker that, is going to listen to people like me, but then make something that just me likes. I think that's fascinating. And this, you said the notion of the intelligent agent, where the human being, because there is a place that's all driven by data, which is the metaverse. What's it going to look like when I get an agent going off and doing my shopping? But I think what you said at the end, that about the general artificial general intelligence versus narrow. Let's go into that a little bit more. But before I get there was one other thing you said, Mike, that I know has tripped me up before, but in my marketer's brain, I kind of think that AI has both the bigger opportunity and the bigger task in business to consumer advertising, just because there is more data and more people. And yet you said, no, actually, hang on a minute, business to business is almost more complicated because the signals are a little more missing. Can you give me a little bit more depth on that? Why does business to business communications and marketing really need to take the lead here?
Yeah. So if you think about it, Amazon has been doing this search trick and this content recommendation trick for decades. I mean, it's been doing it since the early 2000s, so probably about 20 years. And they were not using AI in the beginning, but it worked pretty well. And the reason is because it's a very simple signal to know if people found what they're looking for because they buy it. So in e-commerce, it's really simple to know the answer. And so you can have better techniques like AI instead of just rules-based things, the way original software programming was. But the truth is that the data is the most important part, right? The data is the fuel of not only of automation but of AI itself. And so for consumer products, where it's e-commerce particularly, the data is so clear, it's so simple that it's very easy to produce a better experience based on the data. In B2B, it's much harder. In B2B, you might have people with a buying cycle that takes months or even years. You might have a number of people who are part of that buying cycle. So they're each individually coming to a website and asking their questions. And when they get the answer to the question, they'll leave because they're done for today. And they haven't given you any indication that they got the answer to their question, right? Because they leave if they don't get the answer to their question, they get frustrated as well. And so you don't know if that sale is progressing or if it's over. But by just looking at data like here's a page that was viewed, things like that, there's no way for you to figure that out easily. Analytics systems don't do that. I mean, if you think about how an analytics system looks at a search, so for example, suppose someone searches for something and then they click on it, they go to the page, and then they immediately see that this is wrong. Let me go back to the search page. Let me click on something else. Let me go to that page. Oh, that's wrong too. Let me go back. And then they're like, I don't see anything here I want to click on. Let me search for something else. And then I get a new list of results and I'm like, I don't see anything here. I'm leaving the site. Now, because I told you the story that way, you would say there are two searches done and they were both unsuccessful. But think about how a web analytics system works. It says two searches, two clicks. I think they were both successful. Okay. And so that's totally wrong, right? And that's the simplistic way of looking at it. And so in e-commerce, you can look at things in a simplistic way because you've got that event that they're buying something. But in a high consideration sale, it's not just B2B, right? So it's really a high consideration sale. So if you were buying a car or you were buying life insurance as a consumer, you have the same problems there. If you're buying a stapler for your business, you don't have the problem there, right? So it's not quite B2B versus B2C. It's really high consideration versus low consideration sales. And for high consideration sales, it's very hard to know what the signals are that you look at. That's why we've spent 5 years researching this. And so we have a combination of signals that we look at. So we look at how much time they've spent on the page. Did they click deeper into the experience? Did they fill out a form? Did they download an asset? Did they backtrack, right? Did they go to the header and click on something there? And so there are success signals, there are failure signals, but none of them by themselves, like with an e-commerce thing, say for sure this is a success or a failure. With e-commerce, you've got that one signal that says, hey, they put it in the cart and they bought it. I know that's a success, right? Whereas with B2B, all of these signals have to be weighed. And that's when you use things like predictive analytics. That's when you use AI and machine learning to try and figure out what the successes are and what the signals are of that success. And that's what we've spent a lot of time doing at Solo Segment.
That's interesting. By the way, my boss at the conference board, you do have to do your work on buying a stapler for the office. He needs to know that you've done all of the search and all of the comparisons and that you're getting good value for money. So, Mike, when we do that, presumably there are software solutions that, every marketer, every communicator gets hit up with sales calls. There are software solutions that help us do this, but what distinguishes AI software from the more, the functional ones like the Marketos and the MailChimps and where do we move from that data management and customer relationship management through to everything from deep fake videos to kind of managing the entirety of a customer experience or a customer journey? What's the difference?
So, in a lot of cases, there won't be any difference. And that's really what the marketer ought to look for. There's a type of thing called embedded AI, where if you like just the examples you gave of Marketo and Salesforce, they have AI built into them. So that's the easiest way for a marketer to adopt AI. So if your goal is to adopt AI, and remember, I warned you that that shouldn't be your goal. Your goal should be to make things more effective. But if your boss is asking you, "Hey, tell me about that, AI stuff, and how are we doing that?" You actually probably already have some of it. Some of the marketing tech components that you've already installed probably have AI built into them already, and so you might want to figure out how to use them. Now, some of them require a lot of work for you to get data into the component, and that can be hard. But many of them don't. Many of them already you're using the data that they already collect, and so that's actually very good. And so, what I would be focusing on in the beginning is what's easy. I think marketers have been brainwashed that technology has to be hard, and it's got to be you have to hire like two high priests every time you would bring something in, and you have to look at cost of ownership, and it takes 6 months of a project for you to get the thing to even turn on. And I think that's a mistake. I think that you should be looking for technology that's simpler to implement. Like the technology we have, all you do is put a JavaScript on the pages of your site and it starts to work. That's the kind of thing I think you should be looking for. And the embedded stuff that I was talking about, if you've already got Marketo, if you've already got Salesforce, you can probably take advantage of at least some of the AI techniques that they have in there without doing much of anything. And that's what I'd be focused on, is try to do as little as possible. Try to find the marketing technologies that are easy, because that's what lets you experiment. That's what lets you try something very simply to see if it's effective. Because if it is effective, now all of a sudden you've got this brand new capability, and it wasn't that hard to do. What I see all too often is people out there hiring data scientists that they're trying to keep from going to work for Facebook for $500,000 a year, and they don't keep them very long. It's very hard to justify having a data scientist devoted to marketing, because your company is going to want the data scientist devoted to your product. And so it's very, very difficult for you to kind of roll your own AI and marketing. I would be looking for MarTech components that are easy to adopt or that you've already adopted, and try to find the AI capabilities in there.
I think that's a brilliant one-liner for everybody to remember. Marketers have been brainwashed into believing technology is difficult, and yet when it's working, it makes things easy. It makes them
Right.
faster, it makes them better, it makes them smarter, it makes them cheaper. And by the way, all of us probably already have some AI operating somewhere in our system. So can you give me an example of where that AI is already making a massive difference to a company? But we're not allowed to talk Amazon. Obviously, Amazon's one, but pick. And you gave me Nike earlier on, but something that will surprise all of us, that is actually happening and it's out there.
Yeah, so I think Salesforce is a good example. So not Salesforce, the product. So if you're using Salesforce, there is an AI engine built into it called Einstein, and what it can do is it can actually look at your history of which deals have closed, and it can look at the characteristics of those customers. And what it can do is it can then tell your salespeople which deals are underway that have similar characteristics that are the most likely ones to close. So it's the one for them to spend the most time on. And you might say, well, what does that have to do with marketing? Well, guess what? What do you think the marketing qualified leads are trying to lead to? So if you knew what the characteristics were of the best sales qualified leads, now all of a sudden you have some of the characteristics of the best marketing qualified leads. And so this lets you start to tune your marketing so that you know what characteristics you're going after. And so any marketer who has Salesforce installed can get it, can take advantage of this. But there's all sorts of uses of AI out there. I mean, we have one client who was having an enormous time doing something that you'd think is really simple, tagging their content with a subject. And you'd say, well, geez, that seems so easy. Why can't the author do that? Well, a lot of times the author is so close to the information that they don't know how a human being that's reading it would actually view that information. We also found that they are incredibly inconsistent in how they do tagging, not just from person to person, but there's a study that was done by one of our advisors that shows that if you show the same document to the same person a couple of days apart, 35% of the time they disagree with themselves as to what document and what topic it's about. And so it turns out that this is a very difficult task for human beings to do accurately. So instead, what we did is we focused on pulling together all of the content and showing a list of what we thought the reasonable topics might be. And using human in the loop AI, we let the human beings say, hey, that's a stupid idea. Don't show that topic. These four are actually the same one. Combine them together. And so there's a bunch of feedback that they gave to our mechanism. But once they gave that, then we were able to automatically categorize all of their content. And we do that to this day, every day that it changes. And so what happened before is they had 5% of their content tagged and about 50% of that was wrong. And now they have almost 100% tagged, and probably it's about 90 to 92% accurate. And the thing that's really good about the automation is not even just the fact that it's fast, like as soon as the content changes, it's tagged properly, or that it's accurate, or that it has all that potential increase in the number of documents that are tagged, like from 5% to almost 100%. But here's another thing that's true. Human beings are incredibly inconsistent at that task. And no matter how much you train them, they don't get better. With the AI, it is incredibly consistent and you can keep improving it so that it's consistently getting better. So even if you could have AI that was only as accurate as a human being, if you can make it better, but you can't make the human beings better, that still might be something to invest in.
Wow, and full transparency, I do that nearly all the time. Disagree with myself, and can't believe I can't believe somebody tagged it like this, and then somebody says, "But that was you, Ivan," and I go, "Great, but that was one of my other personalities." So I don't actually agree with him. So let's drill down just into one area, and then we'll wrap up, Mike. But this notion that we can definitely correct things and tag things. What about creating them? Does AI have a near-in future? Like you said, it can fill in the missing blanks in a speech that John F. Kennedy gave, or things that we've seen. But is it going to very rapidly develop the ability to take the data, understand what somebody wants to hear about their running shoe or about their sales lead, and automatically create the finished piece, the finished article for us? How far away are we from that?
We are past that. It does that already. And that's the thing that Google's fighting, right? Is that you can give it, a sentence or two, or you can give it a couple of facts, or you can tell it, go read this information, and it can generate content that looks like a human being wrote it. And so we're already there. And so that's the thing that we were talking about earlier that Google is actually fighting against. They don't want, the web to just be overrun with generated content.
And can it do the pictures and the films and the people and the?
It's a little further, yeah, a little further behind on things that aren't text. But you've seen the deep fake technology that's out there where you can put a person and make it seem like they're saying something. So if you think about that, if you can generate the text, it can generate speech from the text. The AI can already do that, right? That's what all these smart speaker systems do. And so if you want to give it a person, that you have film of, you can actually have that person saying those things and looking like they're saying those things. So there are places where it's starting to put these things together. It's starting to put together being able to add music behind things. It's starting to put together being able to show background photos while you're talking about something. So these things are beginning. I'd say in 2-3 years, they'll be relatively commonplace as well. But the thing that's really interesting is, to me, the market backlash against it. Google's backlash against it. I think you'll see other backlashes against it as well, where it becomes so cheap and easy to generate so much content that the system is going to actually fight against that as being the way to do it. And it's going to try and enforce some ability to have human beings involved in order to just raise the price. I mean, it's kind of like spam email, right? It costs nothing to send out an email. And so there has to be things in the system that are stopping it, right? Because the economic incentive is so high to do it.
That's a great point. So what we've just witnessed is, the market's moving faster than our understanding of it as marketers sometimes. You can read books like The Fourth Transformation by Scoble in Israel from 2017, or Quantum Marketing by Raja Rajamana, and it'll bring you up to speed. But even then, this is going to move faster, and there are kind of all sorts of interesting connective tissue that's going to have to come into this world. So if you had to look like, 10 years out, knowing what you know now, what would a successful marketing and sales organization have achieved? Because you've been talking a bit about sales and marketing starting to have much more of an integration around the path of AI. And what in the world of tech integration and automation and machine learning and the application of AI, what's a successful marketing organization done? And what would a company of the future look like?
I don't think I know 10 years from now. I really don't. I think it's so far from it. I mean, if you look 10 years back, we were still trying to figure out what impact the iPhone was going to have, right? I mean, so I think 10 years is an incredibly long time in technology. So what I'd rather do than try and think of what we're going to do in 10 years is tell marketers what they should be doing now to get them prepared for what's going to happen over the next 3 to 5 years, and probably 10 years too. Because there are a lot of things you could be doing right away. The first thing I'd be doing is focusing on your current MarTech stack. So try to find opportunities in there, like we mentioned before, where you can make things more effective, where you can do things more experimentally. The other thing I'd be doing is focusing on data. Get your data in order. Make sure that you can, if it's a data lake, whatever it is that you have to do to get your data together, so that you can pull data into whatever application needs the data. That's the sales data and the marketing data. And you want all of that to be in a place that you can quickly move it to wherever it needs to go. And so that's a big project. I'd be focusing on that right away. The other thing I would focus on, and this is more controversial, is I think that marketers are missing the boat when it comes to data about customers. I think they've learned all the wrong lessons from Google and Facebook and Amazon. They've learned that you have to know everything about your customer in order to be successful. But I don't think that most companies are going to get that data from their customer. I think most customers don't want to give up that data. We kind of force them to tell us their email address with a case study that they need to download, and even then, half the time we get mickey@mouse.com, right? So people are trying very hard not to tell us things because they know the next step is for us to stalk them. right? Is that we're going to start contacting them. We're going to be on their list. And so when we're consuming things, we try really hard not to be revealed, to be anonymous. And instead, what we as marketers are doing is we've seen GDPR come in and other privacy regulations. We've seen cookie restrictions. We've seen the loss of IP data because people are working from home. So now you don't know what company they're from when they're coming to your site. And so we've seen all this stuff go away. And what we think is that no, we still have to know everything about the customer, because that's what Amazon does, and that's what Google does, and that's what Facebook does. But we're not Amazon, Google, or Facebook. We're a totally different company. And so I think what we need to do is to really get comfortable using anonymous data, using behavioral data, using the kind of data that is not going to go away. If you look at the prognosticators about Web3, where they're talking about the fact that Web3 is about ownership. So Web1 was about broadcasting. That was the original web. The social web, Web2, is about being able to change things, being able to contribute, being able to have anybody be able to put things on the web, right? So if you post on Facebook, you are contributing to what's out there, right? So that's Web2. They're saying Web3 is about ownership. So right now, we're seeing kind of NFTs and all sorts of weird stuff that people are doing as ownership. That's not, to me, what people care about owning. I think NFTs are becoming NFWs very quickly. And what's happening here is that what people really want to own is their identity. They want to own their information. And that's what's going to happen, is people are going to own their own information, and you'll be able to share it with companies when you want to, and only as much as you want to, and for as long as you want to. And that's where you're going to see the blockchain really start to hold your identity information. And so no one's going to know it's you. It's just like when you go to the grocery store. They don't know it's you, but the grocery store has done a really good job of researching what customers do in general when they're anonymous, right? And so there's a reason they put the milk in the back of the store, because they're trying to get their goals done at the same time you're trying to get your goals done. And so there's this tension between what the customer wants and what the business wants, and they can do it using anonymous information. Well, you have a bucket load of anonymous information available to you. You need to start getting comfortable using the anonymous information and not trying to walk right up to the creepy line of trying to figure out whatever people are. They don't want you to know who they are. They don't want you to be creepy. They don't want you to back up just 2 steps because there's a new law out. What they want is for you to deal with them anonymously, and you can be successful and create a great experience even when they're anonymous, just like a grocery store does. And that's what I think is the biggest thing that people should be getting ready for, is that the internet is anonymous, and it's going to stay anonymous for almost every company that's out there. You're not going to know who's coming to your website. It's getting harder and harder to know, and you need to adjust.
I think that's great. I've heard everybody tell me for the last 25 years, hey, go get your MarTech sorted out, go get your data sorted out.
Right.
Those things we keep getting told. By the way, everybody still needs to do it. But that one about Web 3.0 and getting ready for high expectation of the consumer with lower levels of infinite quantum level data. How do we get to that sort of more macro understanding? All right, Mike, that was fantastic. We're going to do this again in 2 years' time, in which case it will be a machine called Ivan talking to a machine called Mike. Right now, I think that was a fine demonstration, Mike, that human intelligence is still beating the machines. We don't know how long it's going to last. I'm hoping at least another 10 years. But thank you so much, Mike, for leaving us with some really big thoughts here about how AI is actually going to transform marketing. But by the way, that it's been doing it, like you said, since the 1970s. So let's hope that we keep getting better. Let's hope that the data serves the consumer. And let's remember that marketing is all about that experience, and the communication is all about the story that delights the consumer but drives your business forward. So thank you very much for being on Influencers. Let's keep us tuned and watch out for the next podcast, and you'll be able to download it obviously wherever you get your podcasts. And if you think it's good, send it on to a friend. So thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.
This has been Influencers from the Conference Board.